So we're going to dig in just a second because I want to make sure we maximize our time with Jasmine. Alan, do you want to spotlight speaker? Hi, Rachel. Thanks for being here. Do you want to spotlight speaker once Jasmine gets started? You don't need to spotlight me while I'm reading her bio. Or you can just spotlight Jasmine now while I talk about her. And now it's really uncomfortable, Jasmine, because you're going to be spotlighted while I go on and on about how wonderful you are. So
I'm okay. I'm excited.
Just enjoy.
Basking in it.
Exactly. Just bask in the glory. All right. So hello, St. John community. We are so happy that you're here. And we're really, really delighted that parents and caregivers and faculty members are investing time in this conversation this evening. So this is a conversation extension of the conversation we started in the fall around race with Dave Watson. So at that time, Dave walked us through some basics of the social construct of race and anti-racist work. And at the conclusion of that conversation, many of you expressed interest in continuing the conversation, and you were asking really great questions right up to the end of that evening with Dave. So we're so honored to have another race educator, Jasmine Bradshaw, join us this evening to help us continue in this important work. We know that conversations around race can be hard, and we acknowledge that we must continue to talk about race as we strive to build and uphold a safe and inclusive St. John community. Since announcing Jasmine as our speaker, we've been overjoyed to hear from some of you who are already rabid fans of her work, which makes Jasmine such a special guest. And what also makes her so special in her work uniquely to anti-racism is her ability to bring simplicity and clarity to deeply complex and layered concepts around race and culture. I suspect this gift is due in part to her background as a former second grade teacher. So officially, Jasmine's bio tells us that she is a researcher, an anti-racist educator, and a podcaster who believes that creating a more loving and inclusive home and just society starts within the sacred walls of our families and our houses. Her extraordinary podcast, First Name Basis, exists to give parents and caregivers the tools they need to raise anti-racist families. Jasmine invites her audience to wrestle with hard questions and use these answers to create the world we want, a world where every single child can be exactly who they are and reach their full potential. She hopes her community makes parents and caregivers feel empowered and gives them the confidence they need to create lasting change in their spheres of influence. When Jasmine is not digging deep into her work, she is at home with her family in Arizona, very likely chasing her most adorable young daughters, Violet and Holly. As Jasmine is speaking this evening, please feel free to use the chat for questions and comments. You can also private chat or private message Alan and I questions, and we'll make sure that we funnel them to Jasmine as we have the opportunity to do so, and then for sure at the end when we have time for Q&A. And lastly, I want to take a moment to honor all the ways that you show up for your work, Jasmine. It's not easy, and in many instances, it's not safe for a Black biracial woman to lead in mostly white spaces. And you do it with consistent strength, tenacity, and such incredible grace. We appreciate you, and we deeply appreciate the work and personal nature of the work that you're going to be sharing with us this evening. So with that, I'm officially passing the mic to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh my gosh, y'all, I'm so excited to be here. As you know, I'm Jasmine Bradshaw, and I absolutely adore Sarah. She's one of my dearest friends. So I'm really excited that I get to be in community with you tonight. So I have a presentation. I am going to share my screen, but I want you to know that you can ask questions throughout. I love for it to be a conversation. So if you have something, pop it in the chat. Definitely, you can private message Sarah or Alan if you have anything that you don't necessarily want everybody to see. But let me share my screen. And while I'm doing that, what I want you to do is there are 3 dots next to your picture. Click those 3 dots and then click rename. If you haven't yet, go ahead and put your most affirming pronouns in your name so that we know when you're in the chat what you feel most comfortable with. So click the 3 dots, click rename, and pop in your pronouns while I get my screen ready to share. All right. So, of course, you know, at this point, I'm Jasmine Bradshaw, and I want to share with you tonight the first 3 steps to becoming an anti-racist family. And let me actually get my chat pulled up so I can make sure I see. Okay, perfect. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about is the jumpstart that you need to get you moving from good intentions to confident action so that you can really create an anti-racist family culture in your own home and in your school community. And really, I believe that starts with sharing your values of equality and inclusion with your kiddos. Before we jump in, I want to share about myself a little bit. So yes, Sarah told you this picture in the middle, that is me and my family. My husband, Carter, is a lawyer here in Mesa, and my little daughter, Violet. So this is kind of an old picture. My daughter, Violet, is now almost 5, and my daughter, Holly, is now almost 2. That picture you're seeing on the left is my family. Those are my parents. I also have a sister not pictured, but I have to include my parents whenever I share my work with anyone because they are the reason I do what I do. My parents were both public servants. My dad was the dean of financial aid for our local community college district. So he helped people go to college who didn't have the resources they needed. And my mom is a clinical psychologist who specializes in PTSD, and she worked at the VA for 30 years helping veterans. So watching them get up each and every day and do these things that are so important to the community is really the reason I'm able to do what I do, because I saw them model that for me, and we'll talk about that later on as well. And then this picture that you're seeing on the right, that is me in my classroom. I used to be a teacher. I taught 2nd grade. I taught a little bit of 3rd grade, and it was such an amazing time. And when I left the classroom to start my family and I was reflecting on what I wanted to do differently and the kind of teacher I wanted to be, one of the biggest things that I learned was that I really missed out on the opportunity to provide an anti-racist space for my students. And I think that could have really done some amazing things in their life and in mine as a classroom community. So now I'm kind of on a mission to share it with as many people as I can so that they can create these anti-racist spaces that I didn't necessarily get to do while I was actually a classroom teacher. Okay, sorry, let me just, oh, there we go. Okay, so a little bit of background about first name basis. I teach kiddos and parents how to create anti-racist spaces, whether it be in their home or in their community. And I do that primarily through my podcast called First Name Basis. And I just hit 500,000 downloads, which I cannot believe is real life. And the other way that I share this information is through the programs that I create. So I have a handful of programs, and one of our most beloved is called Bite Size Black History, where I share about Black history figures that have been overlooked by our history books. It is a mini podcast just for kids. You press play and you get to learn all about Black history. And then, of course, on the right, I had to share a little testimonial because there are so many amazing people that I've heard from who have been able to absolutely transform their families and their lives because of the work that I do. And I'm totally honored to do it alongside them. So that's just a little background on me and on First Name Basis and the work that I get to do. I really believe that embracing anti-racism in your home is the best way that we're going to create inclusive and just communities. And I think that it's something that we all desperately are seeking for, even those who are kind of going kicking and screaming. I think that they will be able to see that the benefits of anti-racism, the benefits of inclusion are that all of our kiddos get to reach their full potential. And so that's why this work is so important. The first thing that I want to do is make sure that we are all on the same page, because if you listen to my show, you know, I think it's so important that we get those definitions that we can all agree on, because I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with when they're having conversations about race is that they are not all talking about the same thing. Some people are mistakenly thinking that racism is personal prejudice. It's calling someone a mean name or doing something rude to someone, and it's between two people. And that is part of it. But the reality is that racism is much bigger and deeper than that. Racism is personal prejudice and bias and the systemic misuse and abuse of power by institutions. And that definition comes from This Book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. And I like to think of it as prejudice plus power. I'm sure you've probably heard that before. That prejudice piece is what you're probably really comfortable with understanding. Racism definitely includes personal prejudice, but we also have to look at the systems of power that are in play that are creating oppressive outcomes for people of color, mainly Black people. So racism isn't just the personal prejudice piece. We have to add the systems of power into that. If we're going to really make change, we have to not only break down the prejudice, but we have to break down the systems and rebuild them to be something that's more inclusive. So of course, well, after talking about racism, we need to talk about what is anti-racism. And I'm just going to read you this definition, and then I'm going to point out two things in this definition that I really love, because there are lots of definitions of anti-racism out there, but I think these two specific things I want you to key in on. So anti-racism is the practice of actively identifying and opposing racism. The goal of anti-racism is to actively change policies, behaviors, and beliefs that perpetuate racist ideas and actions. So I love this definition because I see the word actively twice. Anti-racism is an action. It is something that we have to do. There are a lot of people who think they are non-racist, and that is a very passive place to be on your anti-racist journey. You're actually not on your journey yet, I guess I should say. But anti-racism is an action. It's something that we are actively doing. We're actively dismantling systems that are oppressing people. And the other thing I want to point out about this definition is that it has the behavior piece, that is the personal prejudice, the behaviors and the beliefs, but it also has the policy piece. And if we are really going to make our communities inclusive and anti-racist, we have to focus on the policies that are creating systemically oppressive outcomes. Okay, I just hid the chat from myself, so let me make sure I've got it up. Okay, yes, Chris says, actively love it. Okay, and this is one of my favorite quotes in the whole world because it is from Miss Angela Davis. She is an activist. I'm sure you recognize her, but she says, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So that's the piece I was talking about. Non-racist is a very passive thing, like I don't like racism. And most of us can agree on that fact. But in order to be anti-racist, we have to understand that we have a responsibility here, and then we have to take action. Okay, so before I dive into the 3 steps, I want you to just take a minute and take a deep breath. This topic is important and it's heavy and it can be hard, and you might feel your heart beating fast, you might feel your palms getting sweaty, you might feel your belly kind of tightening up, and those are all super normal things to feel and experience when we're talking about something that's so important to all of us. The reason why you feel anxious is because you care. And so I want to encourage you that as we're going through this conversation, and when you take this information into your home or into your communities, to stay engaged with it, because I think that that is something that people struggle with so much. They rub up against the hard, they rub up against the discomfort, and then they're like super hands off. So remember that you can always lean into your breath, and you can always lean into understanding like, okay, am I safe in this space? If I am safe, I should move forward with my anti-racist work. Okay. All right, so let's dive into the 3 steps to creating your anti-racist family culture. The first is that I really want you to start with yourself. And it's so funny because I think that parents and caregivers, teachers, oftentimes will skip over this step because they want to go straight to helping their kiddos, which I understand is super important, but you got to start with you, because how can we teach our kiddos something that we don't understand ourselves? So first thing you're going to do is reflect. Where are you at on your anti-racist journey? Maybe you're just starting. Maybe you're just figuring out what in the heck even is anti-racism? What does it mean in my life? And what does it look like? Or maybe you've read a few books, you're gung-ho, you're in a book club, you're talking to people, you're ready to talk to your kids. Or maybe you've already talked to your kids and you're ready to take some steps and make action in your community and in your school. Anywhere you're at on your anti-racist journey, just reflect and sit with that and figure out, okay, where am I at? And what is the next step that I want to take? I want to ground us in a little bit of research here. So it's important that we understand where our children are at when it comes to this conversation about race. So our kiddos who are as young as 3 months old, they can racially categorize people. Now, they don't have the racial biases or the stigmas that go along with the racial categories that we have ingested as adults. But our kids as young as 3 months, they can look at people and they can see if someone has a lighter skin and if somebody has darker skin, and they can actually recognize, okay, the people who take care of me usually have this skin tone. And if they see someone with a different skin tone, this will often happen to me. I'll meet a baby who's probably like 3 or 4 months old, and they'll kind of stare at me and they'll kind of be super mesmerized because I'm probably one of the first people of color they've ever seen in their lives. And they're just trying to check me out and figure that out. So our kids definitely can see color. By the time they're 3, our kiddos are expressing explicit forms of racial bias. So this is preschool age. Kiddos are ingesting this stuff and then they are regurgitating it out to their friends around them. By the time they're 5, our children of color are understanding, okay, racism exists, racial stereotypes are real, and they hurt me. So by the time children of color are in kindergarten, they've probably already had an experience that has rocked them a little bit to understand that what racism is and that it's a real thing. And then by the time they're 8, our white children understand that it's socially unacceptable to express these explicit forms of bias, but they still harbor them as implicit forms of prejudice. So I feel like this age range of like birth to 8 is kind of a really good sweet spot to talk to our kids about race, because by the time they turn 8, they already understand like, okay, I think this stuff, but I'm not allowed to say it out loud. I might get me in trouble, or I know that my mom or someone feels really anxious when I talk about this. So they keep it in, but it's still in there. So when our young ones say those things in the grocery store that make you want to like, oh my gosh, get me out of here, it's actually a gift that they're giving you because they're showing you where they need your help. So I want to drive home the point that our kiddos are not too young to talk about skin tone and race. They see it, they understand it. And so that's why it's our responsibility when we're starting with ourselves to set aside time to learn, both on our own and together with our babies. Okay, let me tell you a story. So this is my daughter Violet when she was 2, and I remember taking this picture on Thanksgiving. And usually when I go out to dinner with my husband, which we do like once a month, I take this little black bag, and it's super cute. It has a bow on it, and it makes me feel like an actual person outside of being a mom. Like I don't want to take my diaper bag to the restaurant because that's not cute, right? And so I always take this bag. And one time my little Violet, when she was 2, she went into my closet and she got this bag and she brought it to me and she was like, Mom, I need this. And I was like, why? What do you need that for, Vi? Where are you going? And she goes, well, I really want Dad to take me to a restaurant, so I need this bag. And I was like, oh, of course, that's why you need this bag. I never said to her, this is the bag that I take to the restaurant. But she watched me so many times get ready to go out with her dad and take this bag to go to the restaurant. So she kind of made that connection in her brain that this is what that is, right? Or like just a few weeks ago, I went on a walk in my neighborhood, and sometimes the people in my neighborhood are a little cranky. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to be so nice to everybody. I'm going to talk to every person I see. And it was a Friday. So every person I saw, I was like, happy Friday, happy Friday. And people were like, okay, why are you talking to me? We get home. I don't think anything of it. That was like in the afternoon. We're eating dinner. My husband sits down for dinner and we're eating and it's totally quiet. And Violet turns to my husband. She goes, hey, Dad, happy Friday. And he was like, thanks. Also, why are you telling me this? And it was just so funny to me because I'm like, oh my gosh, look at her picking this stuff up. She is absolutely this little copycat kiddo. And it's not just her, it is her age. It is all of our kiddos are soaking in the things that we do and the things that we say. So I share that story with you, those stories with you, to help you see that the studies have shown that it doesn't have to be explicitly taught to our children. These ideas of racial prejudice don't have to be said out loud. You don't have to say, we don't like that group of people, or those people are bad, those people are dangerous, for our children to start to pick up on those things in their environment. The example that I like to give is if you live in a place, if you're a person who holds white privilege and you live in a place where a lot of the people look like you, a lot of the people at your church, at your school, at your job, maybe your dentist is white, your accountant is white, your doctor is white, all of these people around you are mirroring your racial identity. So your kiddo is picking that up. They're understanding that these are the people who love me, who trust me, who take care of me, right? And then you go to Walmart and the person at Walmart is bagging your groceries categories and helping you find things, and that person is a person of color. And then you go to the tire shop and you need a new tire on your car, so somebody's changing your tire, and that person is a person of color. Our children, both young and bigger ones, are super good at categorizing. And we ask them to categorize all day long. We say, what color is this? How many do you have? Which two things go together? I was a teacher on those standardized tests, the little thing with the colon in the middle where you have to be like, which of these match, right? They're always putting people and things in categories. So we as parents, to think that they would stop with people is just kind of naive. It doesn't make sense that we would ask them all day long to put things in categories and then for us to expect that they would stop when it comes to people. So that's why they have to see the representation in your life and in your environment in order to internalize, okay, this idea of inclusion, this idea of anti-racism is real to me. Because if they are going about their life, and even if you're saying to them, like, it's important to love everyone, that's so vague, and our kiddos don't really understand that. We have to be a lot more explicit. Okay, just checking on the time. Okay, the last thing I want to tell you about step one is that you have to model. So like I said, I was a teacher, a second grade teacher, and one of the most common questions I got from parents was, how do I get my kids to read more? And if you're a teacher watching this, you know what I'm about to say. They're like, how do I get my kids to read more? I want my kid to read. I don't know what to do. What do I say to them? How do I get them? Do I like force them? Do I set a timer? And I'm like, you know what you got to do? You have to read. You have to read. You have to show them like what it looks like for someone to be reading. Because I read this article in the New York Times. It was a study that was talking about getting kids to read more. And it said, if you want to raise a reader, be a reader. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is perfect for anti-racism. If you want to raise an activist, be an activist. Our kiddos cannot be what they can't see. And so that's what I mean when I say start with yourself. What does it look like in your life to be an everyday activist? What does it look like in your life to be anti-racist and to say something when you hear that joke, or to make a commitment to call your senator when you know that there's a policy that's disproportionately affecting people of color? Okay, step two. So we've talked about starting with yourself. Now let's talk about getting super comfy with questions, because this topic comes with a whole waterfall of questions. I'm sure you've already gotten some of them. And one of the things that I help parents and caregivers, teachers understand is that you've got to resist the urge to shush. Mommy, why is that guy all covered in black paint? Or, Dad, what? Did he eat a lot of chocolate pudding? Is that why his skin is so brown? And you're like, shh, oh my gosh, get me out of here. Be quiet. Do not say one more word, child, right? Like, oh, I can feel it in my throat. But when you're in those situations, you have to resist the urge to shush, because shushing our kids teaches them that this is something shameful. This is something we don't talk about. This is something we shouldn't talk about. And this is absolutely off limits topic, right? But the research shows that the questions don't stop coming, they just stop asking. So our children, they've got questions in their little brains, they've got them in their little hearts. Yes, Chris says a teachable moment. We have to embrace those teachable moments and answer their questions and help them see that, no, this isn't something to be ashamed of. This is something that we can openly talk about. Because there's another anti-racist educator that I absolutely love, and I would encourage you to get familiar with her work and follow her. Her name is Britt Hawthorne, and she explained it so well. She was talking about how we tell our kids all day long what to do. And if they're not doing it right, they can trust that we're going to help them, right? Like, this is how you tie your shoes. This is how you sit in the car. This is how you are respectful to your teachers. This is how you do every single thing in your life. And if they're not doing it right, they can count on us to be like, oh, hey, let me help you. Let me guide you. So when we're thinking about race and racism, if our kids are internalizing racist prejudice attitudes, maybe even if we don't understand that they're doing it and we don't know, they start to think that they've got it right because, well, no one's correcting me. And they always correct me. They tell me how to tie my shoes. They tell me how to blow my nose, for goodness sakes. So if they're not correcting me, that means I've already got it down. But that's why we have to keep that line of communication open. That's why we have to see those moments of like, oh my gosh, in the grocery store as actual little gifts that they're giving us. because it helps us to answer their questions, to answer them honestly, so that they keep asking those questions and keep revealing to us what are the prejudices that maybe they have internalized that we want to help them correct so that they can be more in line with your family values. One of the things I hear from people all the time is that as soon as they start talking about anti-racism with their kids will start saying things that are absolutely mortifying. And they're like, what? I'm making things worse. Like, how could this be possible? I tried my hardest. We're talking about it. And now they're saying all this stuff. That is not you making things worse. There's actually studies that show that that's how kids react because you have opened that line of communication. So now they're free to kind of tell you the things that they've got inside. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that was in there. And I do not like that. But it's like Chris was saying, it's that teachable moment. You're not making things worse. This is totally normal. And when you open that door, you might be surprised at what's coming out, but that's actually a great thing that you're dealing with it now and not when they're like 35. Okay, the last thing I want to tell you about getting comfy with questions is that it's really okay if you don't have the answers. It's totally okay. It's totally normal, because I don't know why we as adults think that this topic, yes, it's absolutely so important, but I don't know why we think that we have to have all the answers. Yes, you need to learn. Yes, you need to continue to progress on your journey. But my daughter the other day was asking me all these questions about the moon. Do I know anything about the moon? Like, no, I know that it's up there. That's pretty much the extent. And like, it glows from the sun, I'm pretty sure. Like, she's asking me all these questions and I'm saying to her, I don't know, but let's find that out together, right? And that's what you need to model for your kiddos. Yeah, it's up there. That's what we're modeling for our kiddos when it comes to anti-racism. It's okay, I'm not sure, but I do know how to find the answer, and let me figure that out with you. Let me show you how to figure that out. Okay. The last step that I want to encourage you to take in order to become an anti-racist family and create this culture of anti-racism is to approach your kiddos in a developmentally appropriate way. So that's another really big question that I get from parents is like, well, how do I know what to say and when? And I want to tell you, there are 4 goals of anti-bias education. And these 4 goals actually come from 2 amazing researchers. Their names are Louise Derman-Sparks and Julie Olson-Edwards. And that book is actually a teacher education book. So that's why I read it. So if you any teachers watching, you might love that book. Oops, sorry. But I want to help you understand that these 4 goals, I say that the first 2 are for 0 to 6, but if you're just starting these conversations about anti-racism, you'll want to start with goal 1. I just want people to understand that they shouldn't be necessarily going into goal 3 and goal 4 until their kiddos are elementary school age, because they're not developmentally ready. So that's kind of why I say 0 to 6. But if you're just starting and your kiddo is 10 and this is just you're just dipping your toe into inclusion anti-racism, you can absolutely start with goal 1. So the first goal is that each child will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive social identities. So that's understanding, okay, I am unique. And what is my unique situation in this world? Who am I? What are my identities? What are my identities that I can be proud of? What are my identities that might hold privilege and I'll need to do something with? Like just figuring out what is something that I can be super excited about within myself. The second goal is that each child will express comfort and joy with human diversity, accurate language for human differences, and deep, caring human connections. Now, this is when we start to move into, okay, now I know about myself. Now I need to look at the world around me and figure out what is constant. One of the only things that's constant in this world is that everyone is different. The world is always changing, but I can tell you one thing that will never change, and that is that everyone is different. Whether it be your culture, your religion, your race, there are so many things that make you, you. And when we are experiencing this diversity, it can be super exciting and it can be fun, but it can also cause a little bit of friction. So first, in our first goal, we're helping our kids understand who they are. And in our second goal, we're helping our kids understand that people are different from you. I love you so much, but you're not the center of the universe. And you get to embrace the people around you. In my family, I know that you guys are elementary, so you might not obviously sing this, but we watch Daniel Tiger because, Daniel is king. And there's a song on there. He goes, families are different and that's okay. And we've switched the word to people. So we sing, people are different and that's okay. So when my kiddos will ask me a question about like, why do they do that? Or why does she wear that on her head? Why are they eating that kind of food? We sing the song and then we have a good conversation. And it's just kind of like a little touch point for my kids to know this is something that is okay. It's good. It's exciting. And let's talk about it together. So once we help our kiddos understand who they are, we help them understand that differences are important and great. The third thing we'll want to do with our children, and this is for ages 6 and up, so we're thinking kindergartners and up, we want to help them recognize unfairness, have language to describe unfairness, and understand that unfairness hurts. So a lot of people will be like, how in the world do I explain racism to my kiddo when I am just now figuring out what it is myself? You do not have to start with racism. You can start with unfairness, and then you can work your way up to giving a word to the concept that you've been talking about for such a long time. Because I promise you, your children will understand if someone got 2 handfuls of goldfish and they only got 1, you're going to hear about it, right? Like, I know if you're a teacher or a parent, you're definitely going to be hearing about the unfairness that's happening in their life. Probably the first thing they tell you when they get in the car after school. So we're helping our kids see what unfairness is going on around you, and unfairness hurts. Another thing, so the 2 most common things I hear after parents start talking to their kids about race is, number 1, oh my gosh, I made things worse. They said things that I do not want them to say. And number 2, people will say, my white child said, I'm so happy I'm not brown, or I'm so happy I'm not black. Oh my gosh, it's such a relief. And they're like, I'm mortified. That's not what I was trying to teach them. And what I help people understand is it's not being black or being brown that's the problem. It's the unfairness in the systems that we're living under. And it's that your kiddo is seeing, I do not want to experience this unfairness. I don't think anyone should experience this unfairness, right? So you can help them see it's not about being black. Being black is great. I love being black. And that's not what makes my life hard. What makes my life hard is the unfairness in the systems around me that are continuously perpetuating oppression. So obviously you're not going to say it in that high level to kiddos, but helping them see that being black, being brown, being someone who is a person of color is actually really exciting. And it's the unfair situations, the unfair systems that we have to tackle. So helping them recognize that in their school community and in their community at large will help them see that they actually do have a really good handle on what they can do and what their responsibility is in this situation. So speaking of responsibility, the last goal is to empower our kiddos to give them the skills to act with others or alone against prejudice and or discriminatory actions. So a lot of the time, this is the goal that people want to skip to, right? Like, okay, you see something wrong and you got to act, which of course, that's absolutely important. But if we don't start with helping them understand who they are, helping them understand why differences are important and a normal part of life, helping them understand what the unfairness even is, they won't be able to take action against it. So if we're helping our kiddos move through these 4 goals, by the end of it, they should have the skills and the wherewithal to be able to recognize a situation is unfair and then feel empowered to take action about it. So now that you know the 3 first steps to becoming the anti-racist family or an anti-racist school community, I want to share a resource with you. This is absolutely free. This is my Race Talk Roadmap. You can download it just by going to the link right here. And we have one for older kiddos and one for younger kiddos. So anything that's developmentally appropriate for your kiddos, we have it for you there if you go to that link, and we can share all of this with you after the fact. And I want to support you on this journey. I love doing this. I hope you can tell this is something that I get so much life-giving, healing energy from, and I want to do it with you. So listen to the First Name Basis podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I guess I should tell you kind of the story of why it's called First Name Basis, because a lot of people are like, why did you name it that? But when I tell you, you'll understand. So I was reading about implicit bias, and that's one of the first things we tackle, right? When we're thinking about race and racism is like, okay, what's going on inside me that that is something that I want to get rid of, something that I want to overcome on this anti-racist journey. And one of the best ways you can overcome your implicit bias is by getting to know and getting on a first name basis with people who are different from you. So that's why it's called first name basis. So we can really get to start to understand, each other and what we're going through and support each other in solidarity on these journeys. And of course, follow me on Instagram at firstname.basis. The last program that I want to tell you about before we take questions is my program called Ally Elementary. And I have both Ally Elementary and Ally Elementary Junior. And it's really your roadmap for raising courageous anti-racist allies that our communities need. So we go through, over the course of just over a month, we go through everything from what is race to where did it come from and what is the history behind it, to how does it affect people today in their lives and what can you do about it. So it's actually, enrollment is closed right now, but if you want to get on the wait list for that, that's just firstnamebasis.org/Ally Elementary. And that is all I have for you. I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Jasmine, what's the, we'll put the link for the roadmap in the chat as well. Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, it's firstnamebasis.org/race talk.
Oh, race talk. Okay. I didn't type it fast enough. I'll grab that and put it in. So we have a question from Maria in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to read it or do you want to scroll up? I'm happy to read it to you.
Yeah, will you read it?
Sure. It's definitely true. Young children are aware of physical differences from other kids, i.e. height, size, physical abilities, and even skin tone. What can I say to the young ones as young as 3 years old when they say they don't like the color brown or afraid of another child with a darker skin tone? I always tell kids to have a loving heart and that all colors are beautiful, but it's hard when there isn't enough representation. That's why I love Moana, Mulan, and Encanto, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, because representation matters.
That's really good. So Maria, I feel that. And I think what you're saying is that the representation in your life is coming from a lot of outside sources, which is fantastic. But one of the things that our children need to see is like representation of actual people that they know and can look up to and can sometimes form relationships with. So what I would encourage you to do is figure out kind of where that's missing in your life and maybe how you can put it in. Obviously, like attending cultural festivals and things like that, but even just like going to your local library and striking up conversations with people. I think too, it's getting to the root of why. Like, why is this 3-year-old afraid of children with darker skin? Like, did something happen? Is that something that you can talk through to help them see that skin tone doesn't make someone a good or bad person? Skin tone doesn't make someone do things that are good or bad or scary or not scary. It really has to do with the person's behavior, and it's not about their skin tone. And the thing is, the second piece of that is that they've probably seen media that is depicting people of color as dangerous, as scary. And so that kind of, and it sounds like you're already doing that, is your job to have that counter pressure to the media that they're seeing. So maybe try to uncover, why is this happening? And then look in your life, kind of take an inventory of your life and see, like, do we have meaningful representations of people of color in our life? And if not, how can I fix that? Like the people that I mentioned at the beginning, your accountant, your doctor, your dentist, those people, I like to call them like, who did I hear this from? I can't remember. I did not make this up. I don't want to take credit, but somebody called them like the board of directors of your life, right? And who is on this board of directors? What does it look like? Is it all people who have your same racial identity, or is it people who are of different racial identities? Because our kiddos need to have people that they look up to and that they trust, who are people of color, in order for that to really be broken down, that bias.
Thank you. I have a couple questions sent via private message. What do you tell white parents who teach their children to not see color?
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, that's a problem. I think so. I'm wondering if this person.
Can I ask like a follow-up?
Yeah.
Because so the two parts of it would be the people, because I think there's two camps of this. there's people who are like teaching their children that really consciously. And then there's people who are unconsciously, who think they're doing a really great job, that are teaching their children to not see color, not understanding the ramifications of that. So I don't know if you want to speak to both ends of that.
Yes. And the reason why that is, a lot of people will do it unconsciously. And like, this is not a character judgment of anybody who chooses that route, because that is what we were taught, a lot of us growing up, because the research was not readily available or accessible to parents. And so that's why my work is so important. I heard someone say when I was watching a lecture, like, we need someone to take this out of academia and get it into the hands of the masses. And I was like, I will be that person. So if there is someone in your life who thinks that way, it's probably just that they're leaning on their kind of their own understanding of what it is. You can, in this country, you can become a Supreme Court justice without ever having any type of formal training on race or racism. Like, there are lots of people sitting in those chairs who have not even had these conversations at all. So it's totally okay when we have friends who are making missteps. I think one of the biggest things I would say is approach them with grace. If you're a person of color, you need to know, well, I want to be specific. If you are a Black person or Black biracial person, this is not your responsibility. If you are a person of color who has a little more privilege, if you're a person of color who feels like you can take this on and it's safe for you, or if you're a white person, then you need to have this conversation. I would say go into it with grace and help them see that being a person of color is actually something we love and something we like to talk about. If you don't see my color, you will not be able to see all of the life experiences that make me me, and that make me feel excited, feel unique, and feel special. So it's like, I don't understand why someone, well, once you explain that to people, hopefully they'll be able to see it. And if they push back and say, well, I've heard a lot of people, when I have this conversation with them, they'll say, well, my kids don't see color. And that's when you can lean on the research and you can help them know, well, the research actually shows that our kiddos are able to categorize people by color by the time they're 3 months old, that our kiddos are internalizing racial bias by the time they're 3 years old. So when you're able to pull these things out of your back pocket because you've done this work, people won't really be able to continue to say like, oh, well, my kids don't see color. So moving on, like, help them see that when you don't see color, you're not seeing me. And that's a huge like thing that you're missing out on about our relationship. I have a lot of friends who don't see color, and that means I just don't talk to them about the things that are going on in my life that are really important to me. And that really hinders our relationship from being something that could be really deep and meaningful. So that's kind of, the price that you pay when something like that happens.
Thank you. Can you talk about how to start? This is another question I got in Messenger. How to start the conversation with older kids?
Yeah, definitely. The conversation with older kiddos, like I said, it depends. If you haven't started it yet, start with themselves. What is your culture? What is something that you can be excited about and proud of? And let me emphasize that when we're talking to kids who hold white privilege, we're not telling them like, to say things like, okay, let me start here. Obviously, we know that it's totally okay, acceptable, exciting to say, Black pride, Black power. We do not do that when it comes to people who hold white privilege, because the reason why we have to have pride in our racial identity is because that culture was taken from us, was stripped from us during the time of enslavement. So I will never know where my family is from in Africa. So I identify more with understanding my racial identity. But your kiddos who hold white privilege, where do you come from before coming to the United States? That's something you can totally be excited about. What was your culture before colonization? That's something you can totally embrace. What is something about your family culture there's culture that you can see, music, religion, well, depending on your religion, depends. But I'm thinking like your clothes, all of those things. But then there's this thing called deep culture, which is like, I was asking my husband the other day, what did your mom give you when you were sick? When you're sick, you had a sore throat, what did your mom give you? He said his mom gave him apple juice. Never heard of that. That's a piece of his deep culture. My mom gave me tea. My grandma is from the Bahamas and they drink aloe tea, which is literally not my favorite thing in the world, feel like it tastes really, really not my favorite, but that's part of my culture, right? That's deep culture. Those are the things that we do in our family that I'm super proud of, even though I don't love the taste of it, because it's a part of me. So with older kiddos, you can start in that same place with them understanding who they are. The other thing I would, Alan says for the Filipinos in the house, Vicks. Yes, Vicks on the chest. Oh, absolutely. The other thing with older kiddos is just asking them, what have you seen in your life? Like, what did you hear something? Have you heard anything at school? Like anything that feels unfair, anything that feels uncomfy? What did you do? How did the adults in the room respond? Like, what do you think you could have done differently, or they could have done differently? Because I can promise you that your kids have probably heard something or seen something on the news that they've wanted to talk about that maybe they're like, I don't know, we don't talk about this here, so I've never brought it up. So just opening the door and asking super open-ended questions, and then you can go from there, understanding, okay, what is their understanding of these issues and how can I take steps forward? So let's say you have that conversation, because I want to give you something actionable. You have that conversation and they're like, well, I remember you guys watching the news and seeing some people on the news, and I'm having a hard time understanding, like, are the police good or are the police bad? Right? Like, I could see you getting that question. That's a hard question. And that's where you have to look into your own family values. What do you think about the police? What are your experiences with the police? And what are other people's experiences with the police? What do you think should happen? Like, there are so many layers to this. And that's why it's so important to start with your own understanding, because how can you answer that question if you've never kind of confronted those feelings or those values on your own? In my family, I've had it was a few months ago, I got pulled over because my registration was out of date and I didn't know. But I had to have that conversation with my daughter, because in that moment I turned around and I had to tell her, like, you got to sit still, you got to be quiet, do not say anything. And she's kind of like, why is mom talking to me like this? Right? But I was so scared. And everything finishes up with the police officer, and he leaves, and she that night was like working through it, and I'm like, are you okay? That was kind of scary today, how are you feeling? And one of the things she said was like, why? And I explained, like, I have to pay money to make so that they know that our car is for us, and I didn't pay the money yet because I didn't know, but I'm going to pay it and everything will be fine. And she was like, I don't understand why the person who wants you to pay the money for the car is like, has a gun. And I was like, that's a really good observation. I don't think the people who are asking you to pay money for the car should have a gun. So maybe that's a situation where I believe that the police should not be doing that work. Who else in our community can do that work who doesn't have a gun? She's 4 years old, y'all. Like, she's seeing this. And this is a real conversation I had with my 4-year-old. So your kiddos, even if they're older, I promise you, they have something that they've been thinking about or something that they've been wondering. And we've got to listen to them for, like, what do you think should happen? Yeah, that's weird. Why does the person asking me for money for the car have a gun? They probably shouldn't. Which, sorry, that was very political. I don't know how political you wanted me to get, but that's what I think.
Here for it. One of the things that we have done is just like noticing things out loud. So this started like a year ago. We were watching a kids cooking competition, and I started noticing that all of the kids that advanced from one level to the next were always the boys. I was like, why are all the boys always? And the show was like 8 or 9 years old. And the first 3 seasons, all the boys kept on advancing, and a boy won like the first 3 seasons. And finally I was like, Vinny, did you know? And he was like, yeah, mom. Like, so just noticing things were like, now he picks up on to your point earlier about, like, then kids say things where you're like, okay, like, it doesn't apply to everything, but now he notices representation in a lot of different capacities that I didn't, like, I was just making a casual observation that I thought was kind of neutral and and verbalizing something, but now he like points it out in a lot of places. So it's interesting how that at a certain age really starts to carry over.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of like working through it out loud too. And that's what I tell a lot of parents about bias, because you'll notice now if you are kind of tuned into it, you'll see yourself kind of leaning into bias and be like, oh, that's not really what I want to be thinking right now. It's really good to say that out loud. Like you were saying, Sarah, model that for your kids. You're driving down the street in your neighborhood. Let's say you live in a predominantly white neighborhood and so there's like a Black person walking there and you're thinking to yourself, you could be thinking you could be thinking the same thing two ways. You could be thinking, what are they doing here? Or you could be thinking, what are they doing here? Right? But it's just that thought of like, they don't belong here is part of your internal story of bias. And so to be able to say out loud, hey, I just have this thought and it's something that I don't like that. I don't agree with that. And my brain went there because that's a bias. It's an automatic thing I thought, but I think I'm going to try to change it. And you can say all of this out loud to your kids and then reframe it. He's probably going on a walk with his dog. He's probably going to a picnic at the park with his family. Like just really making it into something that is totally normal because that's probably what he's doing is really helpful for our kids to see. You modeling that, but also saying it out loud helps make, they say, I'm sure you've heard this, neurons that fire together, wire together. So it's just about rewiring those neurons that are firing together automatically without you wanting them to.
Another question. Thank you for all the information you've shared with us this evening. I'm a middle school teacher and want to know if any of the resources you shared tonight are especially geared toward middle schoolers. Do you have any middle schooler specific resources?
Yeah, so Bite-Sized Black History, I would say, is for anyone from, we've talked about like between second and like 8th and 9th grade. I've had people who have kiddos. I've actually had people who have kiddos who are like 4 and 5 listening to it who love it, and people who have kids who are 12 and 13 who love it. Just Bite-Sized Black History is very story based. So I love it because everybody loves to hear a story. And it's just good conversation starters. But Ally Elementary, that's my curriculum that kind of takes you through the process of understanding like, who am I? What am I doing here? And what does it mean to be an ally in my community? That is for, Ally Elementary Junior is for kindergarten through 2nd grade, and Ally Elementary is for 3rd through 8th.
Awesome. So piggybacking on Bite-Sized Black History, one of the things that you and I have had conversations about that you really brought to my attention a while ago in one of your episodes was Black joy. And so we are really good as a culture and as educators in wanting to share history in an accurate way in many cases. But when we do that, a lot of times we are doing that in ways that consistently highlight Black oppression, and which is certainly very real, but we don't highlight Black joy. And so I know with Bite-Sized Black History, you were really intentional around, and a lot of the resources that you share, you're really intentional around. And one of the examples you gave on an early episode of your podcast was like, when I'm buying books for my kids, it's like about a little girl who's Black going to a birthday party, because Black kids go to birthday parties. It's not about like every story being about a pain and oppression, because we also want to highlight Black joy and make sure that white people understand Black joy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the spark for me behind Bite-Sized Black History was that I hated Black History Month growing up. I hated it because I went to a predominantly white school, and during Black History Month, we talked about slavery and we talked about civil rights, which are all really horrible things. And I felt like everybody was watching me to be like, how is she reacting? And most of the time I wanted to cry, but I felt like I couldn't because everybody was watching me. Like it was just this horrible thing. And I've developed this aversion. I remember my dad. So I told you, like, I do this because my parents did it for me. My dad, I love him so much, but I hated him in this moment. I got this like science magazine in the mail, and it was February and they didn't have anything for Black History Month. So he's like, I'm going to send them an email. And he's like, why don't you have anybody Black in this science magazine? It's Black History Month. And I was like, Dad, oh my gosh. Like, so I just had so many like horrible feelings around Black History Month. And I was like, I need to heal from this. Like, Black history is not all bad. There are so many great things. We've accomplished so much in spite of the suffering. And so Bite-Sized Black History is meant to focus on the achievement, the joy, the excitement, because we as Black people deserve to experience the amazingness that it is to be Black. Like, to be able to say out loud, like, I'm so proud to be Black. I love being Black. This is something that's great for me, is such a huge, was such a huge growth moment for me. And I hope that other kids, especially kids of color, will be able to experience that younger than I did, but then also white kids, like I was saying, understanding that like, it's not being Black that's hard, it's racism that's the problem. It's not our Blackness. And so being able to see the joy and understand that like Black History Month, if you're just now starting to talk about Black history during Black History Month, like you've kind of missed a lot of opportunities. And we don't necessarily want to be talking about slavery. I had my sweet nephew, my sister-in-law called me in tears because my nephew, he's an 8th grader, and his teacher, February 3rd, showed them a video about Emmett Till. And she was just like, I don't know what to do. He is absolutely scarred. Like he's having nightmares and I don't know what to do. And I was like, so frustrated because I'm like, absolutely, we need to be talking about Emmett Till. That's important. Not sure if he should be seeing the graphic videos of this because adults sometimes have an issue with it. But on the 3rd day of Black History Month, like this is not Black history. What happened to us and what's been done, the oppression, the violence, that's not Black history. That's not our history. That is the history of white supremacy. So you need to really be careful of when you're talking to your kids and teaching them about Black history, that when you say Black history, you mean Black history, which is Black people being amazing. When you're talking about slavery and when you're talking about Jim Crow and segregation and the racism that we see today, police brutality, that is the history of white supremacy. And that's not something that we as Black people are going to claim.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that answer. That was really, really insightful and helpful and impactful. We have a couple minutes left. Are there any other questions? I'm getting text messages of people adoring you. So just so you know, that's happening.
Thank you. I'm like scrolling through the chat to see all your faces. I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful. Yes, thank you for this conversation. Oh,
so I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to encourage folks to just think about, what do you want to take away from this conversation? What do you want, like, what's one actionable thing you can do? What's one thing you can do moving forward? What's one uncomfortable conversation that you can step into, maybe very imperfectly? And then I invite you all to leverage Jasmine's resources because they're incredible. You can be like Alan and just start texting me regularly with like, have you heard this episode yet?
I really love it. Alan, I'm honored.
Every episode is so incredible. And every episode is, one of the messages I got earlier was about how you break things down in such a clear way, and which I've told you a million times is what I think is your gift. But I so often go in to pick out a podcast episode of yours, and every time I'm like, that's the thing I need to know about that I don't know enough about. And then it's like 30 minutes of a deep dive that brings so much clarity. And I feel like you're so intentional and thoughtful about your work. And I feel like the ripples of that are just exponential. So thank you for the ripples that you have created for this community this evening. I know that we have administration on this call. We have teachers on this call. We of course have parents on this call, and those ripples, and when the recording goes out, those ripples will continue in so many ways. So thank you, Jasmine, for being here. Everyone go check out First Name Basis, check out all of Jasmine's resources, and thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I'm so grateful that you have received what I've shared with you. And yes, I try to make my podcast super impactful because I know you're so busy as parents, caregivers, teachers. Like, we do not have time for people who are like saying all the things, taking all of our time, right? So you need half an hour, 45 minutes of what you really need to know. Oh, Erin looks like they have a question.
Erin, if you want to either unmute or pop your question in the chat, feel free, Erin.
No, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, an accidental hand raise.
Erin? That's awesome. Okay.
Yes, Meg, white supremacy history is so useful. Yeah, such a shift. Thank you. I think that was such an important and impactful moment there at the end. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. I'm so glad this was impactful. I keep seeing messages coming in. Thank you all for being in this moment with us, and we will carry this work forward, Jasmine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So grateful. I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Yes, definitely.
Bye.
Thanks, Jasmine. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Nice to meet you.